Greetings, welcome to what I consider to be a pretty important video for tonal composers. As can be seen from the title of the video, I have come to the conclusion that the circle of fifths can be such a powerful tool in the hands of a tonal composer. Now, I have not seen anyone relate the topics yet to be discussed in this video to the circle of fifths, hence the reason for the video. And here is the timestamp of topics that I will cover. All these topics have a relation to the circle of fifths that can potentially make life easier for the average tonal composer. And now let us dive straight into the presentation itself. 12 divided by 2 is 6, and there are 6 notes in the whole tone scale, summing up to 7 when you add the repeated octave note. So with the theme of 12 divided by 2 being 6, we can get some whole tone scales in the circle of fifths just by skipping every second note till we get the 6 notes of the whole tone scale. Let's say I wanted such a scale in D flat. All I would have to do is get my circle of fifths and starting from D flat, skip every second note, which results in D flat, E flat, F, G, A, B, and finally the D flat octave is added to complete the scale. The task is very easily replicable on any other note, which makes life much easier for any composers who seek to explore the whole tone scales but just don't have much grasp of what notes appear in each and every whole tone scale. For such composers, just pick your circle of fifths and skip every second note. No need to use your mental labor in finding those notes. So take notice that 2 as a factor of 12 when used in the circle of fifths results in the 6 notes of the whole tone scale. 12 divided by 3 is 4, and there are 4 notes in a diminished 7th chord. The diminished 7th chord is a powerful modulation tool that has been extensively talked about in so many videos. It has a characteristic of being made up of minor thirds throughout its structure, and that's some symmetry, and has the ability to straighten paths of modulation to 8 different keys, hence its reputation as a powerful modulation tool. Now, I remember back when I was introduced to the concept of diminished 7th modulations, it really fascinated me. But every time I ventured to try and use them, I had to dedicate so much of my mental labor into counting to find which notes make the diminished 7th chord, and also calculating which exact notes to drop half a step in order to reach my desired modulation goal. Another problem I encountered was sometimes using a diminished 7th chord that couldn't modulate to the key I desired. But it was only until I started playing with the circle of fifths that all these mental costs were done away with by this one too. Here is an example of the struggle and how to overcome it with the circle of fifths. Let us say we are in F sharp minor and want to modulate to D major using the diminished 7th chord. For me, this is how I struggled. In making a diminished 7th chord, I would manually write down my first note, e.g. F sharp, and then manually count 4 semitones to find A, another 4 semitones to find C, and my last 4 semitones to find D sharp, and voila, the diminished 7th chord. I chose the diminished 7th chord based on F sharp because some people might think, just as I did, that it's a nice note to base the chord on since F sharp is our current tonic. Thereafter, I would manually write down all the dominant 7th chords that would result from dropping each note of the diminished 7th chord by a semitone. And then I would find out that there is no instance in which the diminished 7th chord based on F sharp modulates to D major. Thus I had to make another diminished 7th chord and use more mental labor finding the resulting key modulations of the other diminished 7th chords. Adding insult to injury, I usually misplaced those papers on which I made modulation calculations, which would result in me having to start all over again. Now, with the circle of fifths coming into the picture, here is how all my problems went away. Since we want to modulate to D major from F sharp minor, all we will have to do is reverse engineer the modulation process using the circle of fifths. So normally we first have a diminished seventh chord and then we lower one note down a semitone to make the dominant seventh chord that gives us the new key. Reverse engineered, we start with the target key and then get the dominant note of the target key and raise it up a semitone. Here is how it looks like on the circle of fifths. First, we start with D major, our target key. The dominant is always the next clockwise note on the circle of fifths, in this case, A. Next, we raise the dominant note half a semitone, in this case, B flat. And lastly, skip to every fourth note on the circle of fifths. 4 notes from B flat is G, another 4 from G is E, another 4 from E is D flat, and voila! We will have found our diminished 7th chord and which exact note in the diminished 7th chord to lower, solely from using the circle of fifths and nothing else. So, modulation from F sharp minor to D major, here is a plan. Not the best, but it at least works. We start with F sharp tonic chord, then F sharp supertonic chord, then we will insert the diminished 7th chord we just reverse engineered. Penultimately, we will lower the note that we raised during the reverse engineering, all whilst keeping the other notes of the diminished 7th chord. And finally, we will have the new key of D. This is what it should sound like. And thus, this is the power found in the circle of fifths, and now I never have to write anything down when I have such a tool at my disposal. So take notice that 3 as a factor of 12 when used in the circle of fifths results in the 4 notes of a diminished 7th chord. To create the diminished 7th chord, just make a perfect cross or a perfect square in the circle of fifths and move it to form the other 2 instances of diminished 7th chords found therein. "12 divided by 4 is 3, and there are 3 notes in the augmented 5th chord. Now, it was last year in 2018 that I found out how diminished 7th chords appear in the circle of fifths. I got used to making squares in the circle of fifths to find diminished 7th chords. Later, something new appeared, and I didn't know what to make of the fact that you could also create a triangle by skipping to every 5th note in the circle of fifths. Heck, I didn't even know the name of this chord up until last month in February. But something in my gut told me that if it appeared in the circle of fifths just like the diminished 7th chord, it must be a special chord. And last month, I think I finally found a modulation or usage for this chord. And so I will take the chance to shell out a chunk of the development section for music I am currently working on. I just hope MIDI renditions won't be too much of a problem for you guys. So without further ado, here is the music and I will explain what is happening after. that music was basically an attempt to use the augmented fifth chords for modulation to the minors, and at least in my opinion it was a fairly successful attempt. The augmented fifth chord, just like the diminished seventh chord, is a symmetrical chord and is made up of major thirds throughout its structure. When used in modulations, we can modulate to 3 different minor keys by raising one of its notes a semitone higher. When the notes are lowered by 1 semitone, we also modulate to 3 different major keys that are relative to the minors that come from raising the notes. Lastly, using the circle of fifths, we can again use a reverse engineering method to determine our modulation techniques precisely. If we wanted to modulate from D major to F sharp minor, because we have to raise a note from the augmented fifth chord in order to modulate, we will lower the F sharp in the spirit of reverse engineering. So F sharp goes down to F natural, and from there we make a triangle in the circle of fifths, which gives us F, A, and C sharp. So now that we know which note to raise, F natural, and which augmented chord to use, we can then easily make a plan to use the D major tonic, then the D major subdominant chord, and then the D major dominant chord, which is the A chord. Penultimately, we would augment the D major dominant chord and lastly arrive in F sharp minor. And this is what it should sound like. So take notice that 4 as a factor of 12 when used in the circle of fifths results in the 3 notes of the augmented fifth chord. To create the augmented fifth chord, just make an equilateral triangle in the circle of fifths and move it around to form the other 3 instances of augmented fifth chords. And this marks the end of the video for part 1. In part 2, I intend to discuss tritones and their uses, and then finally some more circle of fifths trivia. But that will be for another day. Now I hope the content of this video has enriched you, and I would like you to please share whatever thoughts, opinions or critiques you might have about this presentation in the comment section below. Otherwise, thank you for watching.